second grade or third grade, individual little, Frito-Lays or whatever it could be, and decided, hey, I can probably undercut that. Sell merchandise to college kids. Domain squatting was a huge project of mine. I ended up actually sort of managing a small portfolio as a strategic consultant, lived in DC, to banking, and so became a banker in New York City. The sell side, and was there for a little while, a couple of years, and then went over to the buy side. I was working primarily in small cap firms. I quit banking the first second I could. I just didn't really want to get my MBA. I wasn't feeling it. I left and joined a small hedge fund. It's not essentially who's the smartest guy in the room. It's who can make the most persuasive argument, and always had this idea of starting something by myself, a social network that I was going to develop, but it was going to be a little bit different. Much more efficient ways to do it, and sort of abandoned the idea. My father, he ended up getting into a pretty severe accident on the viability of interfaces so that he could interact with the computer a little bit better. I love gardening. I mean, just flat out. I've been gardening since I was a little kid. I started kind of getting into canning and all of the things that when you move to Brooklyn, I think you're legally obliged to start becoming interested in. Check into my garden, and the entire thing is covered by these caterpillars. A lovely older woman in the elevator who was sort of listening intently, and she said, that's because you didn't plant dill between your tomatoes. This old wisdom lives out there, I think especially among kind of that generation, or old wisdom. I started codifying. Someone who'd been working in finance for years, putting together a pretty complex spreadsheet was my bread and butter. I approached a professor at the New School, realized this idea in my head. So it is a physical product that is the manifestation of all of these principles. The researchers, he looked at me and he said, listen, this is the coolest thing I've done in grad school. I would like to stay on with the project. It was dirt in a cardboard box.
Were there seeds in the dirt?
There were seeds in the dirt. 8 properties of certain plants where some of them should have spacing, how close their seeds should be to one another, how deep they should be planted. All of that stuff, which was codified in this spreadsheet, was reflected in this kind of dirt in a box type of product. The Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator sort of gave me a core bunch of kind of early users, and they saw that, hey, people are growing this weird looking kind of dirt in a box. We painted it white, we used GrowSquares. They sit actually on top of the native soil, so they're always exposed. The topology, the materials we use, all of that stuff is done for the ultimate function of servicing the plant. It's me on a bicycle trying to deliver these things. Greatest hits of people with gardening. So what we're also developing is a machine vision system where you can kind of take a picture and it'll tell you if there's any problems with the plants. It's 2 companies, right? We have an app and a huge data science play, and then we have a physical kind of a CPG. Managed to raise money from some micro VC funds. Good investor is in terms of one that believes in your mission. Turned down a number of investors that I think had alternative ideas for where we were developing as a company. Analyze locations, and we're starting with large cities. And we evaluate them for their micro-environmental kind of profiles, or how they look, to 1 square foot grids. And what we do is we say, hey, this particular foot that I'm standing in right now has a wind index of X amount. It has a sunlight profile that looks like this. It has a rain profile that looks like this. What your profile looks like, what your soil taxonomy looks like, this is the best garden you can grow. So our repeat orders have been fantastic. So thus far, more than 80% of users have reordered the system and have carved out a niche, servicing a community for somebody who really wants that hand-holding experience, and only has a garden that is more aligned with the size of something in a city or in a suburb rather than in the countryside. Everybody needs a different recommendation. Yeah. Right here, they already have gardens on there. You got gardens on this roof deck. Actually provide our gardens for free to inner city schools. GrowSquares is not just giving out this initial packet. It's servicing each customer. It's ensuring that they get the right feed in terms of how much to water, when to pick, all of that stuff.
I'm here with Zachary Witman from GrowSquares, which is sort of like the paint by numbers for gardening. There's a lot of tech. They've figured out a lot of things to just make it super easy. And what we do on this show is I look at your history of entrepreneurship all the way from birth.
All right.
So you were telling me about some arbitrage in religious school, but even before that, let's go all the way back. I want to know what your parents did while you were growing up and sort of what the entrepreneurial possible forces or lack of forces that were shaping you were.
Oh, all right, that's a great question. So my father he recently passed, he was a physician.
Did he have his own practice?
He did not have his own practice. So he was a trained oncologist, but later in life he switched to emergency medicine. My mother was involved in politics. So initially, we lived in DC. I was born in Washington.
Was she a politician in DC?
She was not. So she was kind of a back office kind of person.
And not a consultant?
No, so it's more about kind of fundraising and strategy. That was kind of her bread and butter.
Which is quite entrepreneurial, actually, even if you're working for somebody else.
Oh, absolutely. It's helping to define a message. It's helping to get people, outside parties, interested in what it is that you're coalescing around and an idea. And then it's obviously getting people to help you, right? It's going out and soliciting funds, dialing in on exactly what it is that makes the candidate unique. So she'd been doing that for years. She actually, since my father passed, which is a little bit less than a year ago, she decided, hey, maybe we can go a little more front office. And she actually just ran for the mayor of Providence, the city that I grew up in.
And she didn't make it?
Unfortunately, she did not. No, she got into the race a little bit late and was against a pretty popular incumbent. And I think that it's more a reflection of the timing. She just didn't have the necessary time in order to build her campaign like she would have ideally done so. But we're very proud of her, regardless.
So I actually have filmed an episode in Providence a few weeks ago with a guy who started Loom Cube, which is sort of the surf light, waterproof light. And anyway, getting back to you.
Yeah.
Talk about the first entrepreneurial thing you did.
Ooh,
ever.
I don't know if it's the first, but I know we talked very briefly back in, it had to be like second grade or third grade. I had this idea that I was attending Hebrew school in Providence, Rhode Island again, and I know that there was a chance where people were buying little snacks. We didn't have a vending machine, but somebody can go and buy some M&Ms or some Fritos or whatever it might be off of kind of a communal little kind of repository.
Now, what was this repository, a backpack?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was like, it could have been a backpack. It might have been like a box somebody went to Costco with.
Yeah.
But it was, it was a while ago, but it was something like that. It was very informal. But they're charging 50 cents or $1 for these individual little, Frito-Lays or whatever it could be, and decided, hey, I can probably undercut that. So I think my first attempt was honestly just to try to convince my mom to buy just very large packages of candy at Costco.
Uh-huh.
But I remember we tried to rope in a friend of mine. He thought it was a little untoward, so it ended up doing solo. But I think I ended up purchasing these M&M packages from CVS down the street for, I don't know, $5, $10, whatever it was, and would try to upcharge and undercut the pricing of the person who was slinging them out of the side of his backpack. But was run by the temple.
So there's a real pricing war, bidding war going on in second grade.
It was the first of my the dollar pizza competition, where everybody tries to undercut and then you find yourself with 99-cent pizza. And yeah, we definitely ended up with low quality, very low price candy at Temple Emmanuel.
Yes. All right, so what was the next thing you did?
Ooh, good question. What's another thing I did? Probably should have thought about this before. I lived right next to the Brown campus, and would be probably within earshot of the football stadium. And so I did something similar. It wasn't with candy. It was with t-shirts and kind of miscellaneous goods on Saturdays during game day. So I would walk down, we would sell, and this would be a couple of friends of mine and we would sell merchandise to, now that I'm thinking about it, and I had never thought about this, probably drunk college kids. And they ate it up, and this was soda and t-shirts we made. So sort of, and I'm gonna get in trouble with Brown University, and would be t-shirts that we printed up that would be unofficial merchandise, so to speak, but was really, we had a really good time, and I remember made some money too.
There you go.
Yeah, we made some really good money for 5th and 6th graders.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
So why didn't this continue? Why'd you get tired of that? Why didn't you do that for another 10 years?
It's a good question. So part of it is football season only lasts a couple of weeks a year. Plus, divide by 2 on home games. Brown, I don't think, was fortunate to have too many playoff games as well. But I ended up probably spending my Saturdays doing other stuff. Ultimately, winter weekends were spent skiing. I was a big skier, and starting around 7th grade, 8th grade, I ended up spending pretty much every weekend in Vermont. So that the opportunity was sort of cut out from, or the rug was pulled out from under me.
Okay, so to keep going. Like, you did t-shirts in 5th and 6th grade. What was the next entrepreneurial thing that you remember doing?
Other entrepreneurial things in middle school or in high school. I had a ski team in high school, so I actually skied on a mountain that was based in Vermont up until the point I broke my leg, and I broke it pretty badly. I was in a wheelchair for about 6 months, and then I know it was a bad one, and then was in a cast for probably another 6 or 7. So it was over a year that I was pretty much infirmed, which was not the most fun thing in the world, I'll tell you. Especially for someone who, I was in 10th grade, I should have been driving, should have been going out, go to parties.
Yeah.
But
So how'd you spend your time when you broke your leg? Like, did you find any new hobbies? Did you find ways to be productive that you hadn't known before?
At that point, I really thought my future was, probably was pretty immature, but I thought my future was largely going to be skiing. I was going to go to Dartmouth. I was going to spend a lot of time in the Northeast. And I ended up getting bigger into computers.
Yeah.
When I was, infirmed. So I had a laptop, and this is going to date me and tell you how old I am, but this is, almost 20 years ago at this point. And so the laptop, I can tell you, was not the most comfortable thing on a lap, but my parents purchased it for me. And started getting into coding, a little bit deeper into, there was gaming at the time, but started to really understand kind of how a computer works a little bit better than I had ever done before.
So did you make any projects, websites or things that you put out?
This was sort of the early days of the internet. This is, I think, just around the AOL time. Definitely started with some very, very basic websites. A big thing I did was domain squatting was a huge project of mine.
Yeah.
Some of the projects actually sold in, some of the names ended up selling for the 5 figures.
Jeez.
Yeah, I had...
Tell me, what are your names?
I think one of them was like instantquotes.com, so I sold that to an insurance broker.
And did you so you consciously domain squatted?
Oh yeah, and these are concepts too that I didn't fully understand at the time.
But you'll understand 5 figures worth of money.
Yeah, oh no, completely. And I mean, these were small turnaround times too. So I guess I hadn't even thought about this as being an entrepreneurial thing.
That's extremely entrepreneurial.
Yeah. Used my bar mitzvah money to purchase a bunch of domain names. Probably 2/3 of them weren't worth a penny, and ended up lapsing them after a year, 2 years, whatever it might have been. But a couple of them ended up hitting big, and I think I had 2 or 3 domain names that were worth more than $10,000 or $20,000.
Yeah.
By the time they ultimately sold.
Fantastic. So what'd you do with that money?
That money, a lot of it I could probably say was spent at REI. I remember my parents, I bought my car from them, thinking that, hey, they wouldn't actually accept the check and it would be put into my college fund or my IRA. That didn't happen. They took that cash.
If only you had reinvested that all that cash into more domains.
Oh man. Well, at the time, so you had asked also about what I had done. So I'm from, as mentioned, from Rhode Island, and there was this game that I would play in middle school, in high school even, that was called like the Stock Market Challenge. And what it was is you were provided a hypothetical allocation of funds. It was $1 million or $100,000. And then based upon your performance on how you would trade your portfolio, they would rank players. And I know I'm from a small state, but I ended up being in the top 1, 2, or 3 every year I performed. And it wasn't unnoticed by my family and their kind of immediate friends. So I ended up actually sort of managing a small portfolio for some of my parents' friends as well.
Now so you became a wealth manager.
I became a little bit of a wealth manager, yeah.
Now, were you successful? Did you fail?
Part of it was the timing. So I graduated high school in 2000.
So did I.
Yeah, there you go, same age. Don't we look it? And so between 96 and 2000, you couldn't go wrong. So in terms of the alpha that I produced for these people, I don't know if it was that tremendous versus just sort of having a broader market indices, but yeah, they actually ended up doing pretty well.
And did you get out before the .com bubble crash? Or?
I did. I did get out before the .com bubble crash. Part of that was just simple timing, right? It was going away to college.
Yeah. Lucky you.
Yeah, exactly.
You dodged a bullet there.
I might have. And then, I told the family friends I wouldn't have time to really manage their portfolio. But it ended up, working well. I hope that they liquidated their positions. But, one way or another, I walked away with it being up. And we're talking, multiple X's in terms of the return. So I sometimes had a 2 or 3X return, depending upon obviously how long I was invested in an issuance.
Hopefully not in pets.com.
No, but I told you, what they were. Well, first off, I would have to remember. But I don't think they were anything too remarkably different from pets.com. Maybe they had a little bit more staying power. So for a while, once I got out of school, I was mostly involved in kind of my jobs at the time. So the kind of entrepreneurial spirit, it didn't die. I helped out a friend who had launched a record label, was doing some work with them as it continued to grow. But outside, I was mostly just concentrated in my job.
And what was your job?
So I had a couple. So I started off as a strategic consultant, lived in DC. I kind of worked with companies to, was provided kind of a scope of work in terms of, hey, we want to do research or on this particular subject, or we want to learn more about our processes and how to be a little bit more efficient, and would interview the key performers and the key players, and we would come up with kind of a summary of results, and this is how we think the solution should be implemented. Did that for a couple of years, and then switched over to banking, and so became a banker in New York City.
Now, would you work for J.P. Morgan or small hedge fund or what?
So it wasn't a small hedge fund, although I ended up ultimately working with a hedge fund, but it was with a boutique investment bank, and I started on the sell side and was there for a little while, a couple of years, and then went over to the buy side.
So talk about that. What kind of things did you sell?
So these were, anytime it's a boutique company, it's going to be either micro cap or small cap or mid cap companies. I was working primarily in small cap firms, and we had a lot of traction in the media space, but these weren't large media properties, you know.
And what year were we talking?
Oh man, 2006?
So before the crash.
Before the crash, absolutely before the crash. And so at the time, these are people, I remember I did a deal on like a cell phone ringtone provider. You know, these are very kind of dated technologies now, but at the time they were, you know, there were players that had, that made some money. So worked on that for a couple of years. We even worked on companies with legacy technologies. Like I remember we did a big deal with a direct mailer. And then we did a
direct mail is still relevant.
Direct mail is still relevant. I'll give you one that dates it even more. We did a deal with a company that produced checks. To be honest with you, I don't even think I own a checkbook right now. But you know, some of these legacy media companies, if you can even kind of broader call them media firms.
Okay, so buy side, sell side.
Yep.
When did you quit banking?
So I quit banking the first second I could. I was looking for an excuse to get out for probably a year.
Now, you were unhappy?
I was unhappy. My mother will tell you a story. I was working so hard, she came to New York on my birthday. She drove up with, I think, my father and my younger sister might have been there. That one I don't recall, but it was on my birthday. It was in March. I couldn't leave the office. I was working right on literally on Wall Street.
Yeah.
And she happened to run into a friend of mine from Providence who shares my same name. So his name is Zach, and they had printed up all of these happy birthday Zach streamers.
Yeah.
And kind of flyers, and they threw him a little impromptu birthday celebration. It wouldn't be impromptu. They threw him a birthday celebration, him being the surrogate for me. I was working so hard I couldn't come down for the hour to even eat dinner. Yeah. So couldn't wait to get out of there in terms of the timing, but had a tremendous experience, learned a ton, worked with some really, really smart guys. And really kind of understood walking out just so much more than I could have imagined when I walked in a couple of years earlier.
Yeah. So here you are. You just flat out quit.
No. I was waiting for an opportunity to work with another company. So I was interviewing for a while.
Okay. On the side, quietly.
Yeah, on the side, quietly. You know, a part of the path of what a lot of bankers do is they either go to the next tier, become kind of move up the chain, or they go and get their MBA. I just didn't really want to get my MBA. I wasn't feeling it. And so the vertical ascension, there really wasn't a place within the firm itself without leaving to come back or to kind of get promoted. So it all sort of, the timing worked out great. I probably stayed in the position 4 months longer, 6 months longer than I probably should have, because I wasn't going to get an MBA.
So what did you do?
I left and joined a small hedge fund. And it was, I'll tell you, the first couple of months kind of kicked my butt. Really smart guys. I don't think I had the full understanding of what I was getting myself into. Part of what the environment in a lot of hedge funds is, it's not essentially who's the smartest guy in the room. It's who can make the most persuasive argument that their logic is most in tune with the market and is most sound. So it was a bit of I guess the closest I can liken it to is like a high school debate team.
Yeah.
So, as somebody who did mock trial, it felt like it was a lot of the same preparation, a lot of the same steps that you had to take kind of going into work every day. And I loved that environment. I loved the kind of very academic focus and just sort of the I mean, I'll call it a cerebral environment, probably a poor way to apply a label. But it was a fantastic time, and I learned just a ton and surrounded by some great guys.
So what was the conclusion of that hedge fund experience?
So part of that was market timing. We talked about there was a sort of a crash. The returns weren't fantastic for a little ways. Part of the strategies of the fund were had a hard time really transitioning and unloading some of the portfolio that they had, just because of the lack of liquidity of some of the assets that they were involved in. And so performance wasn't fantastic for a little bit of an extended time.
Well, this is right around the crash.
No, this is after.
Yeah.
But part of it is some of the assets they were involved in they couldn't be really traded. They were locked in. You could be traded, but then you would take a haircut on the product. So, but what happened was I was for a couple of years was working there, and always had this idea of starting something by myself or with a friend. Those ideas of what it could be, they vacillated, right? Some things would excite me. There would be some kind of market dynamics that would shift.
So talk about some of these ideas that we're starting to.
Oh man, I had an idea about kind of like a social network that I was going to develop, but it was going to be a little bit different. So one idea was people had paperless post was huge, and I thought,
what is paperless post?
Paperless post is like an Evite.
Right.
You can invite people to a party, and it's a really pretty electronic invitation
Yeah,
in lieu
I've actually
of
gotten one. I remember.
Yeah,
now.
there you go. In lieu of a card. And so my idea was like, hey, there's a whole data aspect of paperless post that I don't think people are really mining, and that is, if you figure out who's sitting next to each other at a table, that's sort of an offline judgment of proximity of people, so how close they are. So that's going to be like who's dating who on a live feed. That's who's actually best friends with who. It's who's actually going to be close to each other and what they think they might be congruencies, or there might be a good fit between parties. And at the time, Facebook didn't really have the strength of measurement of relations in a lot of the metrics that they measure.
So did you actually go and implement this idea?
So started developing this, and the more I was thinking about it, the more I learned I wasn't the only one going about doing that. And it was sort of like this circuitous way to go about and judge sort of strength of relationships and some of those nodal relationships. And so, yeah, there are much more efficient ways to do it, and sort of abandoned the idea over time. But was working with the designer, kind of involved my cousin on it.
And how long did you spend on that?
Probably 6 months.
So that's enough. That's like, that's a long time with no return. And
oh yeah.
You're probably frustrated. So what'd you do next?
Next was so my father, he ended up getting into a pretty severe accident. And he was at the beach one day and a wave hit him, and he became a quadriplegic.
Wow.
And so I spent a considerable amount of my time, or my free time, working with him, both on his recovery and working with some of the technicians. So his interface with the computer, he was very, loves computers, loved new technology, and without the ability to click a mouse or manipulate one, without the ability to use a keyboard, he was put in a pretty tricky situation. And so I spent a lot of time with some of the companies he was working with in terms of creating interfaces, or at least giving feedback on the viability of interfaces, so that he could interact with the computer a little bit better.
Right.
So some of these were voice recognition companies, and he's, it's a longtime doctor. He's very used to dictating types of notes onto a computer, but some of them just weren't really tailored to people with his particular industry, or injury, my apologies. And part of that is his voice, it just wasn't as loud as it used to be.
I'm really sorry.
No, go for it.
This guy is like, he has a 5 square foot shop. I mean, that is pure entrepreneurship right there.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to interrupt your story.
No, not at all. But either way, I ended up spending a lot of time talking with, laying out specs with manufacturers of devices that could serve as kind of alternative interfaces for people with handicaps and disabilities.
So I take it you did not jump into the assistive technology industry?
No, but I would, I attended a couple of conferences. I would go with him to one. Part of it was just understanding that, me as an able-bodied person, working with a computer or working with the device, wasn't by any stretch of the imagination the only type of person that would need to interface. So alternative ways to interact with a computer or an IoT device, I mean, even things as simple as changing the channel on a remote, right, have to fundamentally be rethought by someone without the capacity to press volume and channel up and down.
Yeah. How did this period conclude for you? Like, because you're not in assistive technology today.
No, I'm not. I love gardening. I mean, just flat out. I've been gardening since I was a little kid. And as I started moving from Providence to Pittsburgh to DC to New York, with the succession of each larger city and each environment being more complex and larger, it just got tougher and tougher to do. So ultimately, ending up in the environment that we're in, growing a garden just became sort of infeasible.
Like, how would you grow a garden on that when, if that was your apartment?
Yeah, that's a tough one. If that was your apartment, I think you got a little bit of a roof deck. I mean, a lot of people, when they have no access to the outdoors and their fire escape is illegal to grow in New York City.
People do it all the time.
People do it all the time.
I think my dad's had flowers on his fire escape for 20 years.
Yeah, there you go. It is not something that I can speak to. I'm kind of earmuffs when you say that. If you were to tell our system, people use it outdoors.
Well, it's sort of the same, people use electric scooters here, even though they're technically illegal.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of them recently.
It's like they're so useful and game-changing that, the laws are just behind.
Yeah, I have my own thoughts on scooters, but what I know is it just becomes really tough. And, not only that is the type of person who would be gardening, more often than not, they don't really have the context or the experience to garden, right? If your father's been growing a garden in New York for 20 years.
Like literally a 2-foot by 7-inch flower pot.
Yeah, and I love that, right? Like that's that tinkerer, that person that really just wants to either beautify or get something, from nothing is what we love. I mean, that is pretty much our core customer.
So where did the idea come from? You're getting frustrated because you keep moving to bigger urban areas.
Yes, so ultimately I'm gardening. I was in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. My apartment was on the 8th floor. I could be wrong. No, it's probably the 9th floor. I was lucky to have a big outdoor space, but one morning I go to check my plants, and the whole thing is absolutely covered in these caterpillars.
Now, were your plants on the rooftop?
Yeah, they were on the roof deck. So we had I was fortunate to have this big balcony, this big kind of outdoor space, and I probably was growing, I would say probably 100 different plants. So I had a pretty sizable roof deck, and I appropriated a pretty large portion for plants and vegetables.
So people trying to have parties up there were probably like, did you just you totally eliminate the party space?
It wasn't necessarily all gone, but a lot of it was dedicated to shishito peppers and eggplant and cabbage. The girlfriend probably would have preferred a different type of allocation of space, but I found something that made us both happy.
Now, were you growing this just for a hobby? Like, it sounds like a lot of, a decent chunk of real estate.
Yeah.
Were you
in New York, it was a big one.
Were you trying to get start a growing business?
No, this is, it was just a hobby. I was, at the time, I started kind of getting into canning and all of the things that when you move to Brooklyn, I think you're legally obliged to start becoming interested in. So
right, you got your pickle companies.
Yeah, we start pickling, and I think kombucha might have made a cameo.
Yeah.
We did it all.
Okay, so you got this rooftop garden, and then you still don't have a company, you still don't have a product. So what was the aha moment?
So one day I go in to check in, and I think I was just telling you this, check into my garden, and the entire thing is covered by these caterpillars. Now, keep in mind, my garden is completely inoculated from from the outside world. It's insulated. I'm using all these materials that I got from Lowe's or Home Depot. And so my figure is, listen, if I'm on 120 feet above the ground, there's no parks anywhere near it, and if my garden can suffer an immediate sort of collapse, I mean, anybody's can, right? I got probably the safest space around. So I was actually conveying this sentiment, I would call it more anger than anything else, to my girlfriend at the time. And we were riding up in an elevator in my building, and there was a lovely older woman in the elevator who was sort of listening intently. And as I'm explaining the situation more and more to my girlfriend, she started laughing. And she said, that's because you didn't plant dill between your tomatoes.
Aha! Old wisdom.
Absolutely. Now, all of this old wisdom lives out there. I think especially among kind of that generation, or I think we affectionately labeled her someone from the old country. But oftentimes it hasn't really kind of made the jump to my generation, or to people who are now sort of getting into gardening. And so what happened was that old wisdom I started codifying, right? So these kind of complementary gardening types of schema, plants that would work next to each other, plants that were incompatible, and then started doing some of the research, right? So they just knew that it was two plants didn't grow well next to each other. I started doing more research on, was it a nutrient incompatibility? What actually led to that inherent conflict? So
you get super interested in, the analysis of plants, and it sounds like almost to an obsessive level. And
I have a tendency to do that, yeah.
And so did you just make an like Zach's Encyclopedia of Gardening, or?
Absolutely. I mean, as someone who'd been working in finance for years, putting together a pretty complex spreadsheet was my bread and butter.
Yeah.
So it started with if-then statements, and a bunch of tabs and some, a couple of thousands of cells, and then it sort of escalated from there.
And what did it escalate to?
So I had this idea. So this spreadsheet I started to put more and more time into. Ultimately, I published it on Dropbox, and I said, hey, friends, anyone who's going to a gardening store at the beginning of the season, and it happened to be kind of seasonally appropriate, why don't you check on this before you go to the nursery or you go to Home Depot and pick out your plants. And so I got feedback from friends saying, listen, this is fantastic, but it's still a big pain in the butt, right? I still have to go out there and purchase all of these amendments. I still have to go out there and fully understand the implications of this. And so what I did is I approached a professor at the New School, and I said, hey, I've got this idea, I've got all of this research into biology and chemistry. I'm wondering if you can help me with helping me find a couple of industrial designers to realize this idea in my head. So it is a physical product that is the manifestation of all of these principles that were laid down on this spreadsheet.
So if you just say that to me abstractly, okay, so this guy, he's an industrial design professor.
Yeah.
So he probably helped you shape your vision.
100%. So I actually was appointed with a team of people who helped me really kind of actualize, or at least visualize a lot of these thoughts that were in my head.
Interesting.
Ultimately, it was a pretty far departure from what I kind of thought, the schematics that were running through my brain. I threw out, these are some of the specs that we would like to stay within. The product that I was delivered as sort of a couple of grad students' semester-long research project deviated in a lot of ways, but ultimately it was really helpful in formulating that vision. And one of the researchers, he looked at me and he said, listen, this is the coolest thing I've done in grad school. I would like to stay on with the project if you can give me an offer. And so that was the day I said, listen, if he's going to stay on, if I'm going to start recruiting some additional parties, I got to do this full time.
So here's what I want to know. Going into a graduate school, did you have a agreement in place, or saying I get to keep any of this stuff, or like how did that work?
It's a great question, and it's one that my lawyer has asked me like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
It was absolutely informal until sort of the latter stages, when the professor started realizing, hey, these students are spending a significant portion of their day doing this, and I want to make sure that we're covered. I was talking to a lawyer at the time, and he said, listen, this is a priority. Make sure you get everything down on paper. And so ultimately, we kind of came to terms. It was nothing more than sort of a slight deviation from a boilerplate agreement. No,
were you paying them, or were they just doing this out of the kindness of their heart?
I think this is a kindness of their heart.
Or they were intellectually curious, and would you say you got lucky in that?
I think a lot of what I've found is if you come up with a really cool idea, especially when working with students, and you have a chance for them to apply their innate skills and their kind of curiosity in a project where they find ultimately rewarding and cool, and more than anything else, it's not a big company where they don't really see their vision have any effects on the company at large, people start gravitating towards it. And so we've had a tremendous response in partnering with universities, in identifying students who really see the vision of the company, both in the short term and in the longer term.
Okay, so what was the actual, these two kids, they come up with something. What was the first manifestation of a physical kind of product or prototype, really? What was the first prototype?
It was, I have pictures and I'm happy to show them to you. It was dirt in a cardboard box. It was.
So after 6 months, they came up with dirt in a cardboard box?
It was dirt in a cardboard box. It was nothing more than that.
Okay.
If I recall correctly, there wasn't even a lid. It was, as we talk about in this industry, kind of the minimal viable product.
It's dirt in a box.
I don't think it hits any of the criteria for, from that minimal. It was dirt in a box.
Was it viable? Was it a product? Or
I think you can invite the question of, was it right? Any of those three. I think you could argue it was a product. I don't know if it was a product that anyone wants to go out there and give me a couple of pennies for.
No, but were there seeds in the dirt?
There were seeds in the dirt.
Okay.
So I had talked about finding that certain, or talked earlier with you about certain plants are compatible with others. There's also these innate properties of certain plants where some of them should have spacing, how close their seeds should be to one another, how deep they should be planted. All of that stuff, which was codified in this spreadsheet, was reflected in this kind of dirt in a box type of product. So there was not only was dirt in a box, but it was also a series of deliverables on how one can produce lots of this dirt in a box in a pretty methodical process.
So what was the next step? Did you start trying to sell these boxes?
Oh man, no, I couldn't. I don't think I could. I don't think the best salesman in the world could sell this dirt in a box. What it was is
that'd be a good challenge for another show.
Yeah. So what I did is, I think there were really two different avenues that I went to explore from there. One was a full understanding that this box could not be a product, and it's engaging with the same people, saying, listen, I won't even call this version 1.0. How do we make this more, if it's considering a consumer good, how do we make this more appealing for a mass audience? So it's a lot of research, saying we know what we would like in terms of the internals.
Yeah.
Where can we create kind of an external that is fitting of all of the chemistry, of all the biology that this is taken to develop?
How'd you go about selling dirt in a box, or trying to sell it, or what was the next step?
So it's really tricky to sell dirt in a box. So what we did is saying, listen, our physical product, our packaged good, is not in any place to make that the product that tells our story. Let's go ahead and start putting together digital assets that become the key focal point, both for consumers and for investors. So we started really migrating the majority of our efforts in terms of creating deliverables into putting together something for the digital product. So that's the website, the video, the app. So the focus became more on, let's sort of pivot away in terms of where our resources go, because we can find the most traction in terms of the nominal impact we make, while focusing on the digital delivery.
So what was your minimum digital viable product?
To be honest with you, our first beta test, because we didn't have an app, was sending people emails about when they should water, about when they should pick their garden. All of that stuff was done just on the cheap, with us really kind of doing as much work on our end in a very non-scalable method, but it was giving people dirt in a box, charging a price point that that was not very expensive, but something that they felt like that they were getting a value add by us walking them through the process, even if it wasn't stylized.
Okay, so where did these people come from?
So I was in LA at the time, and I was working with a company called the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and largely met them through those individuals, people who were sort of interested in clean tech or some of the auxiliary industries. So that sort of gave me a core bunch of kind of early users. But from them, to be honest, the majority of our users came from their neighbors, from their friends, when they saw that, hey, people are growing this weird looking kind of dirt in a box. They're talking about getting emails about how much to water.
Let's take a seat for a sec.
Yeah, and that it was sort of a different experience. we had a lot of that viral effect, right? So for every user we started with that I knew about, we ultimately had around 4 or 5 different people register to use the platform, even though, I mean, it was pretty sin ugly. And it was by no means an elegant or scalable solution.
So there was some word of mouth happening.
And there still continues to be. Yeah.
All I see is like plants. How do they know they were your plants? Like,
good question.
I mean, there's like, maybe a 1 hour period maximum where maybe your box, which was maybe branded, is out. But other than that, it's just a plant. Like, how did this word of mouth?
Well, part of it is so there is a little bit of branding. So it was dirt in a box. We made sure that the box, we painted it white. We used GrowSquares. They sit actually on top of the native soil. So they're always exposed.
Got it.
Yeah.
That is advertising space. Why not just make a plant advertising company?
That's it's a different startup. That's going to be your next interviewing.
I want to do it.
There you go. It's every plant's a billboard, right?
That's another cool idea.
So
it's mad science, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, part of what it is that billboard that we call it kind of the scaffold. It is biodegradable. Wow, that said that weird. Is biodegradable, and so it only lasts for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And it's time for the life cycle of the plant. So if it's only there 8 weeks or 10 weeks. What we try to do is mimic the lifetime of that box to reflect how long the plant will be around for.
Interesting. So you probably didn't even think of it as like as a advertising real estate branding play, like a billboard, but that's what it became.
It sort of did. I actually don't even think about it now as it. We engineer the topology, the materials we use, all of that stuff is done for the ultimate function of servicing the plant. But for the first couple of days when it's all brand new and it really hasn't started to grade, that's what it is. It's a very unique asset that we hope in time, as we develop our brand further, people will immediately recognize as GrowSquares.
Wow. Chapters, word about the spreading in Los Angeles. Tell me about that. Was it...
Yeah, so we just picked really just one neighborhood, and we were introduced to a lot of different people. As you guys probably know, Los Angeles is a big community, and we didn't have any of the facilities in order to deliver. We had no packaging. We really had no boxes or shipping type of system. So it was just me on a bicycle trying to deliver these things. And if you're living it's all over Los Angeles, that would be difficult. So I really just picked the neighborhood that I lived closest to. So it was all just within a couple of blocks of my my then girlfriend's apartment in Santa Monica.
And what initial items were you? Which initial seeds were you shipping?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we chose 6 different plants, and these were just sort of what the greatest hits of people with gardening. So it probably wasn't the smartest strategy. It wasn't, hey, what are the problematic plants that people have? It wasn't, hey, what is the highest value plant, right? It was just what's out there already. So we knew that there was demand.
So tomatoes?
It was tomatoes. It was a couple peppers. It was also things that we knew that we fully understood we wouldn't mess up. So yeah, a couple of tomatoes, a couple of peppers. I think we did basil.
Right, everyone does basil.
Yeah, just all the low-hanging fruit.
Not garlic.
We did not do garlic.
It stinks.
We are now actually starting to do tubers. Garlic is one of the leaders among them. Part of what we found is that plants whose bulbs burrow, it doesn't convey the sense of satisfaction that perhaps some plants whose yield is above ground conveys. And so part of what we're also developing is a machine vision system where you can kind of take a picture and it'll tell you if there's any problems with the plants. Those are a little bit more difficult as well if the plant's underground.
So how long ago was the Los Angeles incubator early days?
So a couple years ago, 2+ years ago.
And where did it go from there? Was it just was demand so big, or like was it a slow trajectory? Like how did we get to today in terms of the growth?
So the growth is
of your growth.
The growth of my growth. So, GrowSquares in essence, it's two companies, right? We have an app and a huge data science play, and then we have a physical kind of a CPG product. And so, starting two companies takes a long time. And so part of what drives that, kind of some of our obstacles is seasonality, right? So in New York and Boston and kind of the cities that you have to wear one of these things, you can only grow gardens for a couple months out of the year. And so part of what we have experienced is when it gets cold outside, and it's not necessarily top of mind, it's difficult to get people really excited about gardening. And so we spend a lot of time doing the science, doing the math, really ensuring that our design prompt, all of that stuff works. And then when it gets a little bit warmer, that becomes the more marketing focused play. So, it's still a little too early to grow right now. But over the next couple of weeks, we're going to get out there to the world and remind them that GrowSquares is a great system that makes it nice and easy for people.
So, have you taken on investment?
We have.
Talk about that.
So, investment is we've taken on not as much as we'd like, but we've managed to raise money from some micro VC funds. We've managed to raise money from strategic investors. So these kind of are large companies.
So talk
and then from some angels.
Which large companies?
So we've gonna sort of companies that are in the larger kind of planting space. Kind of have to keep that one.
Okay.
Keep that one a little quieter.
When did you start raising money, and how'd you do it?
Yeah. So raising money is for us. It's been a bit of a battle. But we managed to raise cash sort of within the first couple of months of launching the company, enough for us to put together something a little bit nicer than that kind of minimal viable product we discussed earlier. Part of it has been introductions. It's working your own network. It's trying to identify, hey, who's willing to come on board in a company whose space maybe not as hip as some of the other ones out there. So, last year we were asked why, we weren't on the blockchain.
What does the blockchain have to do with plants?
We got that. It's not the most elegant answer we gave, but oftentimes what you have to do is, the year before that we were asked, are there embedded IoT devices? So part of what you have to do is to really just sort of stick to your guts, to know what avenues are worth exploring. And ones that are a little bit more ephemeral, that are a little bit more kind of a passing wave. But I have to tell you, discovering who a good investor is in terms of one that believes in your mission, one that understands that it takes a couple of years for people to fully realize their company's vision, to sort of work through some of the growing pains, is a tricky person to find. And so we've actually turned down a number of investors that I think had alternative ideas for where we were developing as a company. It's always tough to tell the girlfriend or to tell your mom, you left money on the table. But I think it's for the greater good, and it's for the best for the company's long-term viability.
The difference between your app and your plants. So you're shipping these ready to go, dirt nutrient seeding boxes. I've seen one of them. You showed it. It's pretty slick looking. But then you have this app business. So talk about the app business a little bit.
So the two really can't be completely removed from one another. Right, so what we do is we analyze locations, and we're starting with large cities, and we evaluate them for their micro-environmental kind of profiles, or how they look. Now, you can look at a city and you can say, hey, New York is cold and it's so windy and it's so sunny. What we've done is we've developed systems that can bring that down to accuracies as small as 1 square foot. So we've broken down all of New York, actually all of about 200 different cities, into 1 square foot grids. And what we do is we say, hey, this particular foot that I'm standing in right now has a wind index of X amount. It has a sunlight profile that looks like this. It has a rain profile that looks like this. All of it down very high resolution. We actually get some of our inputs down to much more accurate than a foot, but our system sort of dumbs it down so that we don't max out our AWS credits so quickly. But what we've done then say is, hey, well, based on what your profile looks like, what your soil taxonomy looks like, this is the best garden you can grow. Now, what we often find is that when a user looks at their phone and they check their temperature, or they take a look at their sunlight from their sensors, it's actually different than what some of our answers we get from our APIs and our partners that relay that info. So we ultimately have users on the ground help to calibrate our kind of user-wide, our system-wide inputs. So we're using individuals on the ground to crowdsource data.
Now, are you getting a lot of repeat orders?
So our repeat orders have been fantastic. So thus far, more than 80% of users have reordered the system.
And so your biggest problem is awareness, probably.
Our biggest problem is awareness and is manufacturing. We make products. People on average buy around a dozen of them. In places like Los Angeles, they buy a little bit more. And so, if you imagine you got 10,000 orders, that could be 12,000, 14, it could be 120, 130, 140,000 different units to ship. It just becomes a lot. And so we have scalability issues.
So that's literally that's the place that most people raise money from, or tough it out. Move the train down the tracks. And so I think it's a great problem to have. It's a great place to be.
It's an absolute great problem to have. Part of what we have to deal with is, we make a physical product. And I think a lot of investors in our space, especially when we talk about all the data that we do, a lot of the focus on ensuring we have a personalized product, they see, hey, most of the companies that come to us have zero distribution costs.
Right.
Marginal production costs, again, of zero. Why should we partner with a company that has to deal with inventory management and warehousing and supply chain issues?
Yep.
Where there is this margin contraction and it looks very different on a spreadsheet. And so we really battle for those same investment dollars, in part because we position ourselves as such a smart kind of 2.0 company.
Yeah, but that said, you're doing something like, let's talk about competition. Who were there other people doing a similar thing before you?
People have been gardening for forever, and we can look probably 5,000 years into the future, 10,000 years into the future. Can't tell you much what people will be doing, but I got a pretty good suspicion that people will be growing plants. They might not be driving cars or walking around with smartphones, so we know that there's been people in the space. At the end of the day, we're always going to have competition. Our solution as it stands probably isn't the right thing for hardcore gardeners or people who've been doing this for years and years and years, nor is it the right price point for somebody with a huge garden, right? Like a giant thing in the suburbs. So what we've done is we've really kind of carved out a niche, servicing a community for somebody who really wants that hand-holding experience, and only has a garden that is more aligned with the size of something in a city or in a suburb rather than in the countryside.
So is anybody else crazy enough to make these compostable, pre-nutrient, seed combinations that you're putting out and warehouse them and try and sell them?
I don't think anybody's doing it nearly the way that we are. I mean, our big focus is on personalization. So it's on the fact that everybody needs a different recommendation. I might be we've been walking around New York, and just in the past, 20 minutes or so, we've been in sunshine, we've been in shade, we've been in cold spots, we've been in hot spots, we've been in windy places, we've been in still places.
Let me show you a cool potential garden.
Yeah.
Right there. See that? Right up there?
Which one?
Yeah, look where I'm pointing on the screen.
That's great.
See this guy right here?
Oh yeah,
and
that's a beautiful one.
That's some real estate right there.
Yeah, I mean each of those, right? Each of those balconies.
Yeah.
Right here, they already have gardens on there. You got gardens on this roof deck. Every building just about can probably house one depending upon the HVAC system. And this is just, when we're in the most densely populated place that gets, we start seeing a lot more traction. You'd mentioned that you're from Queens, or you live in Queens. The utilization or the participation in gardening is so much greater when you get into the outer boroughs, or when you get into cities like Boston or Charlotte or Los Angeles, where people maybe aren't as vertically stacked.
Yep.
As you are in downtown Manhattan.
A matter of pushing through this period for you.
We hope, yeah. Well, I think part of what it is, we have a mission, and we can never forget that. And it is one that is involved where we actually provide our gardens for free to inner city schools. I know that there's a lot of investors out there that says, hey, why would you give away product for free? Why would you, sacrifice your margins? We partner with a lot of companies that are taking a look at kind of the environmental impact of keeping or growing food in a localized environment. Again, there are a lot of people out there that says, well, why deviate from just producing as many as you can at as high of a price as you possibly can? And so part of it is just really ensuring that our partners, that our investors, that our team really understands what it is we're developing, both for deployment, for initial customers, but then for kind of the greater good at large. What are we actually hoping to get out of this company, and what is the impact that we're trying to make by launching it?
So all of this impact, it makes me think B Corp. What do you are you thinking about that?
It's something that has crossed our mind. B Corps, there are certain regulatory frameworks and certain restrictions that I don't think we're necessarily prepared to involve ourselves with right now. But that being said, always something to explore later down the road, especially as we develop the company a little bit more. Right now, it's our heads down working on product, working on our marketing strategy, and I think the B Corp thing is something we can absolutely revisit at a later time.
How are you going to? What's your focus this year?
So our focus is on.
And by the way, which way is Jack's? I want to get you back.
Oh, we're right there. We're
sweet.
Less than 2 blocks away. So, our focus is really on launching it's a very cute dog. Launching in a greater market, launching in New York City. We'll be launching in May. So
you're consciously not shipping to New York?
We're consciously not shipping to New York.
Do people try in New York? Do people try to get the GrowSquares and then?
Oh, people try all the time. I've had friends of friends bribe me before, trying to say, hey, I'll give you $100 under the table if you can give this to me. No, we want to make sure that any rollout we do is systematic, is well informed, is something that we're sure we're able to have the capacity on our end to support. So, part of what GrowSquares is not just giving out this initial packet, it's servicing each customer. It's ensuring that they get the right feed in terms of how much to water, when to pick, all of that stuff. So it's making sure our system can handle the volume of each of those customers. The second thing that we're focusing on is putting together our kind of public face, right? We've been scrappy from day one. Not a lot of people involved, so it's organically growing the firm so that we can put out these assets so that people will start to recognize us. It's putting together the marketing so that we really mean something to the world, and it's not just, hey, take a look at this cool little garden that somebody else has there, but they understand the power behind the system and all of the thought that went into it to make it really simple for people.
So what cities is GrowSquares available in? Los Angeles for sure.
So today it's just Los Angeles. Part of that is, it's still cold outside, but we're going to do a launch in May in New York, like we talked about. And with any luck, we'll be able to service also a few kind of key markets in the East Coast. So we'll see about Philly, we'll see about Boston. Really all depends on how we get our act together over the next couple of weeks.
I would think the South is better since it's just sunnier more.
The South is a fantastic market, San Francisco and Texas and Florida.
Yeah, Texas.
And, there's a lot of these by no means is San Francisco the South, but these are markets where it stands, during the winter time you can sort of grow vegetables. We are more thinking about them as a more gradual rollout, because we don't really have to hit that milestone of let's make sure that we get people in the ground in April and May. We can start servicing them a little bit later in the year. So once we've dialed down the system, we're going to kind of go to them a little bit later.
So you still have a lot of cards in your deck that you haven't even played.
We have a lot. We got some probably not just in the deck. We better have a few under our sleeves, and we're waiting for the right time and place.
Love it. So thank you so much. GrowSquares.com.
GrowSquares.com.
And it's an app. Is it iOS and Android?
It is not Android. It will be published in the App Store, in the Apple Store, in the coming weeks. So you can register.
You can't even get it.
No, it's been a beta invite only at this point.
Got it. Because I've been seeing you, at meetings in New York City for months now, and
no, it's all been restricted to kind of people that we've invited. We're doing A/B testing on the UI. We're ensuring that we have the right people to be able to give feedback. And oftentimes, with the volume of getting it out there into the kind of greater world at hand, there's just a lot of voices, and if there's not enough people to listen to it and respond to it, then it's just sort of lost chatter. So we've been very, very deliberate in who we've gotten this in the hands of.
I love it. I'm really excited because I want to see it. I want to see it out there, and then it's just everyone will be growing.
Yeah, that's what we hope. Hope make America green again, right?
That's a great title.
I should please internet forgive me for that one.
No.